How does writing sermon manuscripts help a preacher?
Well, if we start writing sermons on a notebook instead of a paper, it will ensure that our notes will not fly away. That's one way, right? I mean, basically, when you look at several preachers, again, we see so many people just taking a slip of paper and writing the sermons or an outline, and then their notes is lost. I feel that shows a lack of discipline. Writing sermons takes a lot of discipline, but it's worth the discipline, because when we write what we're going to preach, it helps us to think clearly. The words that we use, the illustrations that we use, all those things are articulated well. Now, I'm not saying that we need to take the manuscript to the pulpit and say word to word. I mean, we don't have to read word to word. But writing your sermons can help you to articulate your thoughts better. Also, another advantage with writing sermon manuscripts is that, we can sometimes reuse those sermons. On some occasions, I do preach sermons, and that's nothing wrong, because we sing the same songs over and over again, right? So there's nothing wrong to preach a sermon that we preach to another occasion if it fits the occasion. So that's one thing, and sometimes we can reuse the illustrations. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I've written 7 books. Out of the 7 books, 6 books are essentially my sermon manuscripts, which I've published, edited and published for reading. So we can publish our sermons. We can even write articles. I've been publishing articles every month almost, in spite of all the busy schedule of preaching and teaching and pastoring. Basically because I've spent adequate time in disciplining and writing out a sermon. It takes about 7 to 10 hours to prepare and write out a sermon manuscript. A sermon manuscript, which I prepare, is essentially between 2,000 to 2,500 words. And you can write devotions. I have some of my devotions posted on YouVersion. And I didn't work on any of those devotions from scratch. All of those devotions are basically my sermons. 3-day devotions are basically my 3-point sermons. 7-day devotions are basically 2 different sermons put together, something like that. So I can see that, the writing down manuscripts can really multiply your work. When I was teaching full-time at SABC, one of my senior colleagues mentioned to me, inculcate the habit of writing a manuscript. I used to do that, of course, since I was a professor of homiletics, I used to do that. But when I started working even more seriously on that, I can now see the great benefits, and I'm able to reap the benefits. And I keep telling all my fellow preachers and also students to write the manuscripts, because we can, reutilize them in several ways. And now, as I mentioned, prepare manuscripts, but don't read it. Now, at the same time, I do realize that there are some people who are really gifted at reading a sermon manuscript. I know some of them who read sermons from the pulpit. But again, not all of us are equally gifted in reading a sermon manuscript. If I read a sermon manuscript, I may sound like a newsreader. I don't know. So not everybody is good at it. And generally, we have to prepare the whole manuscript, but we should never read from it. We should be familiar with the manuscript. What I do is basically I highlight important points, underline, put in italics, so that the moment I see it, I know what is there. Then I can look at the audience, look into the eyes of people and preach. But having a sermon manuscript is really, really essential, because sometimes, for example, some people write illustration of me walking down the road. That's what they write, and they don't mention it. Now, 10 years down the line, when they read the manuscript, if they have a manuscript, if it is in a diary or a book, they wonder what happened 10 years back. They don't remember. But if you were to write down the entire illustration, it is still fresh in your mind, and you can use that illustration. I used to do that. That's why I'm mentioning this. Some 15, 16 years back, I used to do that. I used to write illustration of so-and-so, but I don't remember anything of what I mentioned. And sometimes we preach such powerful sermons. Unfortunately, we are unable to reuse some of the content, So that's why writing sermon manuscripts are, really beneficial for the preacher.
Yeah. Pastor, let me tell you something from my experience. I started preaching at church from age of 28 when we formed the church. Initially, I was not much trained. So I spent hours of preparation and it used to be in bullet points.
Okay.
And the sermons would come out good, but after maybe 2-3 weeks, I would have lost those papers.
Right.
Then I started writing my messages in A4 sheets. And handwritten. I started writing, I'm talking the year 2003. So I would write it in maybe 4 to 5 sheets. And after a couple of months, those notes are also, I would not file it and keep it. Then finally my wife gave me a diary.
Okay.
And she said, all that you do and prepare, why don't you put it in the diary? So from 2006 onwards, I started maintaining diaries.
Okay.
So of messages that are there. So even now, I can go and refer back to those diaries and see the series of messages that I've preached, rework on it, sometimes like that. But later when I got hold of a computer, I started typing the messages. So as what you have said, even I have used this message manuscripts for FIBA radio devotions.
Right.
And some articles whenever they want. I don't have to rework on the message entirely.
Yes.
You can take those studies, points, rework a little bit here and there, and our work is multiplied. Can you see the impact of a pastor? Maybe he's solid 40 years of ministry. And 40 years, in 52 weeks, he may be preaching 40 weeks. And 40 weeks, 40 messages a year.
Right.
Into 40. So by the time you finish your ministerial life, you have so many messages to hand over to the next generation.
Absolutely.
And it is, so if I think all pastors can work on writing the manuscripts, it can not only help them, like your messages have been turned into books, where many people are being benefited. We can pass it on to the next generation, and they can take it up from there.
Absolutely. And I would say, of course, writing down sermons again is helpful. And I began writing down my sermons in a diary. But later, when I understood the power of technology and how it helps to write down sermons on Word document, and we can edit them, reuse them, and all of that, I had all my sermons again typed in a computer. I had about 50-60 sermons. We got it all typed in a computer, so I have all those sermons now. I have it on my Dropbox. Wherever I go, I can access these sermons. And as I mentioned, I've wrote devotionals and articles and so on. I posted some of my sermons on sermoncentral.com, and literally thousands of people are able to access that. For instance, Pastor, I'm sharing this for the glory of God. There was one particular devotional I wrote for YouVersion, which I preached to 130 odd people. And it's us is a small congregation, about 130 people. But on YouVersion, more than 50,000 people read that. It's not just about views. People have read because there is a plan. They have to read the plan. Only if they complete the plan, we'll get the statistics. So more than 50,000 people read through that whole devotional. I mean, I was surprised and shocked, looking at, the efforts, the small efforts that we can make, can, really reap a huge harvest. So all that I did was to write it down and just post it, and people get to read that. So there are so many advantages, and there are so many great writers out there, far greater than, far more skilled than we are. So we would like to encourage you, put it out, let others share, let others learn. Of course, we don't encourage people to, we will probably talk about that. We cannot just take somebody's sermon and preach it as it is. But then, we can definitely take some good ideas and really benefit from them.